Robert, I've been interested in belief systems, in examining why we believe what we believe, particularly about people who believe in God or people who are atheists who don't believe in God, that there's a certain, whether it's a cultural, psychological, evolutionary psychology, there's all these things that are built into belief systems. You have a book and have focused on the concept of rationality and religious commitment. Many people would think those contradict each other. And so in building a belief system, how do you, that entails a religious commitment, what's the role of rationality?
You're asking about belief systems with a particular subsystem in mind, I think, the religious one.
Yes.
But let's remember that that interacts with the scientific belief system, if one has it, but the common sense and ethical belief system, which just about everybody has, of course. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing to note is that belief is a narrow term for cognition. If I hope that somebody is going to survive cancer, that's a cognition, but I don't believe it. I hope. So the probability level, if I were to assign a probability, would be a lot lower. Now, I think when you look at a theistic commitment, you can find very often a great deal of difference among the cognitions. Somebody may be certain that if God is perfectly good and created beings of the complexity of you and me, then God cares about us. You couldn't be good and create beings with our capacity for joy and suffering and not care. Okay. But one might have only hope that God is going to save everybody from ultimate dissolution upon bodily death, right? So the belief system actually contains cognitions of different levels of conviction. Remember, too, that you're asking about the relation to behavior, and desire comes in as well, because behavior comes from belief which guides it, and desire which energizes it. So where is the will in what you're calling a belief system? I think that faith that something is so, faith, for example, that God is sovereign, involves a positive attitude toward its being so. So faith has a kind of positivity about it, and it implies a position of the will to act in the positive ways that go with the content of the faith. So certainly a religious outlook where there's commitment is going to involve ordinary behavior and interpersonal relations.
I'm looking at myself.
Yes.
I would have a hope that God exists, the kind of God that would ensure for all humanity, myself included, life after death and all of those things. I have that hope, but I certainly don't have the belief in terms of the conviction. The conviction in terms of conviction, but I don't even have the faith that
too strong.
That's too. So I'm at hope. I haven't gotten to faith, certainly not to belief. So how does that work? Because I have these words, but I'm not sure what they really mean. That I have this hope, but I don't have faith, and I certainly don't have belief.
Maybe you're disturbed by, as many are, the problem of evil. There are terrible things in human history, and we have the lines in Macbeth, "Did heaven look on and would not take their part," said by Macduff about his murdered wife and children. That outcry runs through human history, and it takes a great deal of sophistication to deal with the problem of evil. I think there are many things that can be said, and here, as in many cases, you can have hope that there is no gratuitous evil, that all evil is at least counterbalanced by a greater good. You can have faith that that is so. You can have conviction that that is so. Okay. Now, you're asking also about the rationality of a system of cognitions. I distinguish rationality from justification. Rationality is contrasted with irrationality, justification with being unjustified. It's the fate of all of us sometimes to be unjustified in what we hold, but many of us do not suffer irrationality, at least not often.
So you can be unjustified but rational.
That is correct.
What's an example of that?
Well, you can be unjustified in believing you're right in the solution to a problem, but you're not irrational because you've got evidence, you did careful thinking, you just made a mistake. So mathematicians doing careful proofs can be justified or unjustified, but not irrational. So justification implies rationality, but rationality doesn't imply justification.
Justification being that link between belief and the truth of that.
Well, it's characteristically an element in knowledge. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So what I'm getting at is that it's easy to set the baseline for a rational religious commitment too high, to set it at the level of justification, where you've got evidence of a kind that would convince a skeptic or at least somebody neutral. If you're rational, then you have a permissible view that's consonant with being an overall rational person. You're not a candidate for an asylum. You're not just being stupid. So I have more categories of normative assessment for a worldview than some people do. I also have more gradations among religious cognitions and attitudes than many do. So take a life. It'll have certain experiences, negative and positive. It will have a certain exposure or none to arguments for the existence of God. There will be lives in which non-theism is rational and lives in which theism is rational. And I think there are people who have justification. They have a really good case and experiences that go with it. So we have a lot of variety here.
What are your gradations and compared to others in this hierarchy from hope to knowledge?
Well, suppose you have religious experience in nature, in the hearing of certain sacred music, in reading scripture. Suppose you have a mastery of some of the best arguments for the existence of God. So you have a cumulative case.
Right. Okay.
Suppose, too, that you find the kind of life that you're led to by your religious commitment a very attractive kind of life. And one of the kinds of confirmation you feel in your worldview comes from interpersonal relations of a very positive kind. So overall, pursuing that sort of life can be rational. Note, too, that somebody who regards ethics as epistemically independent of theology, as I do, will often be able to say, I'm not forced to do anything interpersonally that I can't justify from a secular point of view. So that helps to make the overall commitment rational in terms of a pluralistic human life.
But you don't have to be justified. You can be rational but not justified.
That's correct, though pragmatically to say you're unjustified implies you ought to give up the cognition. So I want to say not justified doesn't imply being patently unjustified.
Okay.
Just failing to have that strong position in terms of evidence does not imply lacking rationality, and it does not imply anything to be ashamed of.
If I get myself where I believe in God, and I can be close at times, and it turns out that there is no God, and I was wrong, I was still rational when I thought that. And I was just not justified because the fact
Well, you might have been justified too, but you didn't have knowledge. Because knowledge entails truth, justification doesn't.
Okay.
So we'd have to look at how much grounding you had to decide whether you had justification or not. And look, there are degrees of justification. I'm talking about being justified simpliciter. It's a strong epistemic position. And I'm saying that it's easy to think, and skeptics will want us to think, that you shouldn't believe at all, and you shouldn't even have hope maybe unless you have this strong epistemic position. That's a little narrow, it seems to me, especially if the position isn't going to lead you to do immoral things. So one of the beautiful things about a good, rational religious commitment is that it leads people to tend to do and approve of things that from a secular point of view are admirable. So that has to be fitted into the picture.